We should be live. Everybody, welcome to the, what day is it? July 13th weekly Strength Club podcast slash shit posting. This is going to be the programming episode. So it's going to be a lot of talking on this one, but hopefully this will be kind of like a nice reference or archived video for us that we can just kind of link to whenever people have programming questions, because it comes up every single episode. I have my boy Chase Lindley here. How's it going, Chase?
What's up, guys? Doing well. Just here in the sunny state of OKC. Actually,
How
Oklahoma,
hot is it there?
but
Is it ridiculously hot there right now too?
no, dude, it's not bad. Like in Houston, it was the humidity. I'm starting to sound like an old dad, right? The humidity gets you.
It gets bad with your hair.
But here, it's not bad, man. Like I'm kind of strange. Like I like kind of being burnt and like that hot feeling. Like the other day, like I mowed without a shirt on, almost like semi butt ass naked.
Nice.
I just wanted to burn. Yeah, I'm weird.
Yeah. All right, there you go. Cool. Well, outside of that, you have meet prep coming up. How many more days until the meet?
Are you getting some feedback here?
No.
Mine, I guess it's my
I think
headphones.
it's just you.
Anyways,
the 13th.
It's next weekend, Saturday. Right now, this week is kind of just tapering down the frequency a little bit and just kind of recovering. I feel beat up, and it was funny. I had a shitty ass session Friday. I couldn't snatch like what was a warm up, and this is kind of the weird thing about overtraining is like it just kind of sneaks up on you, and then I look at all the variables and I'm like, oh, like I've lost like 8 pounds of body weight without even me knowing it. Like I don't really feel, well rested. Like I'm constantly tired, and then I recover and I'm like, oh, okay, now I'm back to normal.
Yeah, you're back in action. Okay, cool. So you're just pulling frequency down, letting yourself rest, letting yourself heal. Trying to get into the Zen mindset. Are you watching a lot of weightlifting? Are you just constantly on weightlifting and stuff?
Dude, I'm so bad about that because I'm like, I feel defeated. I'm like, man, I kind of had a shitty session, and then like I'll look up like old videos, or even just like here recently with like the Olympics going on. I'm just like, man, I could fucking. I want like a hyperbolic time chamber. Give me about a session there. I could do it,
You can do it there.
It's gonna take a little bit, man. I'm not satisfied where my numbers are because I'm just competitive like that, and I know it's just gonna take a little bit, but I like the process.
That's great. That's great. We got to do one on that, kind of embracing the process about like eventually as an athlete what you should really be focusing on.
Yeah.
I always know for myself before competition, I find myself being way too mentally absorbed in the content. Like anytime I shut my eyes, I'm thinking about it. So if it's wrestling or judo or BJJ, I'm just constantly just in my head about it. It kills you. And then once you're done, you're like, oh, I'm free. It feels like a spell's,
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it feels like it's completely gone from your head. But okay, programming episode. First, we'll start with some plugs. We have a YouTube channel. You're on it right now. If you're watching this in the future, please subscribe. We have a lot of videos basically going through all the starting strength content. We kind of noticed that there's a rough hole in the game being like, what are the explanations? So if you're not reading the book, you're not being a good student, you're not reading practical programming or strength training, how can you get this information without having to attend a seminar or a camp, which we strongly recommend? That'll give you a much better version of all of this in a really good package. But we have these resources here for you as well. We're both starting strength coaches. The shit testing process for that is pretty extensive. I think the most extensive in the industry, which is why we went after these credentials in the first place. We have our boy Chase here at Chase Lindley or at Chase_Lindley. Follow both of those accounts, please. Chase does online coaching. He's a smart guy. Help you get your price up. I do online coaching as well. You can find me on my website there. If you need a careful hand with programming, do let me know. I work with a lot of multi-sport athletes, particularly a lot of martial artists, so like grapplers, fighters, people like that, a lot of rock climbers, and a lot of endurance athlete people. And a lot of general strength athletes too. So if you just need some help, let me know. And then for Mick, we have support at Strength Club. So if you want to get a video on the show, we do a lot of form checks. Send that video in there. Or if you have some questions, you can ask them in the chat. We have Theodore, Cool Dude, and Jimmy in the chat. The standard gang. Theodore said first, and then what up? How's it going, Theodore? And then we'll keep moving on. All right, Chase, do you want to break down some of these topics for us?
Yeah. So kind of how we're digressing into programming, right, is it's one model, and we kind of do this with the lifts, right? We have the 3-factor model. Same thing with programming, right? We are taking apart the stress recovery adaptation, right? And this is true for every biological being, whether you're a newt just chilling in underneath a log or a human that's trying to get stronger, right? Everyone that is living is subject to a stress. You can recover from that stress and you achieve an adaptation that is specific to that stress. If you want to get stronger, we train with barbells, right? That is our stressor. Our recovery is sleeping well, eating, all those good things. And then our adaptation is being able to lift more weight, right? Hypertrophy, all that stuff, all the good stuff that people nerd out on, right?
Yeah.
Then we kind of have phases into it, right? As we get into programming, we got the novice, right? We deem these titles, so novice, intermediate, and advanced, basically how well you can recover from the stress, right? So novice is technically someone who can recover from a single bout of stress from 24 to 48 hours. Intermediate is about a week. Advanced is 2 weeks to years, all that stuff, right?
One interesting thing is that, kind of within the fitness industry, these didn't really exist in like very accurate or very well-defined terms. No one really took the time to carve a lot of these things out. Ripito did, I believe it was Ripito and Kilgore in the first editions of Practical Programming to really carve those out. A lot of the literature and information on like periodization and more complicated programming, it was all for like higher level athletes who have been through a lifetime of fitness, whereas most people do not fall into that category even a little bit. Even someone like myself or Chase, who has been chasing these things for a little bit over a decade and a half, you're not going to come up to someone who's 30 years old and has been training for 20 years like the athletes who are in these questions are about. So like if you do just take Aunt Susie off the street at age 45, how exactly does programming impact her as a biological organism? So novice, intermediate, advanced. After that, we're going to touch on what variables and tools we have. So like when we are attempting to manipulate this SRA cycle or model that we have, how exactly do we do that? I'll zoom this out so we can see this again. One of the more interesting ones is going to be rate of adaptation versus expectation. So like when you were programming, you have these expectations that you will get stronger at some point. But we also have the reality of how you adapt to it. So kind of reconciling those 2 points. Then we'll go into solutions to what problems. So, you have all of these solutions. We have all of these tools that we can do. We can get really excited about programming. And like what Chase was saying, you can nerd out about this shit to the nth degree. But you kind of have to figure out what problems you have in the first place. And then figuring out what problems you have in the first place helps you get to what assistance lifts you get to. And then we'll finish off there. So we'll go through here. Chase, you've seen this chart a bunch, right?
I have. It's almost like ingrained into my brain.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I feel like this is one of the starting strength posters, right? Do they have this on one of the posters? They have the lifts on the posters.
So you know how like in the back room of the gym, it's kind of decorated with, well, really everywhere in the gym, but more so in the back room, they're kind of decorated with charts and of like, there's some cool charts of athletic performance for the NFL Combine. Like, so I had stats for like vertical jumps for linemen, quarterbacks, running backs, all the positions. And then I think I remember this was in there at one point. I don't know if they took it away or what, but
yeah, it's in the pantheon of good charts. But yeah, break this down for us, man.
Yeah. So on the x-axis here, we have time, right? And on the y, it's basically the amount of stress that you're getting, right? Or more so, it's
genetic potential.
It's more so how well you're adapting to that stress, how you're basically starting out, right? And then you kind of see these lines, right? We'll go to like the one that says rate of adaptation. And then at the x-axis, you can see, again, novice, intermediate, and advanced. As we get closer to what is the it's the origin point, right? Yeah, I got to think back to college anatomy right here, algebra. So the rate of adaptation, right, is starting out real high for novices because they haven't done shit, right? So their rate of adaptation, real high because they can recover from basically anything, right? You get someone who's coming in completely detrained. You put them on the stationary bike for a little bit and their squat will go up, right? Even though it's not the same movement. Now, that doesn't last forever, but that is typically what we see as a ranked novice, right? Mm-hmm. And then as they get further into it, as they spend more time in the gym, you can see that rate of adaptation kind of slows down a little bit. But on the other aspect, the strength performance line, their ability to recover from it and get stronger, that's increasing. It starts out real low, again, because if let's say we have an old lady, she's coming in, she can't come up out of the bottom of the squat, right? And that's kind of like one extreme of it. But even everyone who comes in doing their first session, they're always pretty damn sore. And that kind of tells you like they've never really used, the muscle mass as their adequate potential. And they've never done the movements that we're teaching.
Yeah. No Fat Gamer G in the comments. We have a few questions. But he said, what units is Y measured in? Y is proximity to genetic potential. You can see that in the superscript above the dashed line in the top. While it is not, a discrete unit of measurement, what it is saying is that as you are relatively far away from your genetic potential, your rate of adaptation will be its relative fastest. So if you are someone who's, let's say, their frame, they can carry 180 pounds of body weight and they have a 530 pound pull, they're probably pretty close to their genetic potential. Their rate of adaptation is going to be infinitesimally smaller than someone who is, they can carry 220 pounds on their frame. They're deadlifting 135 and it's their third session. So their rate of adaptation is going to be really high. I think the really interesting part about this graph is going to be the gap between strength performance and training complexity. Training complexity kind of waves. It starts really simple. There's not much training complexity, and then it slowly ramps up, and once it peaks or once it starts to kind of crest into its peak, it'll stay relatively flat. Once you get to certain amounts of advanced training complexity kind of flatlines just like everything else does. But with strength performance will shoot up and ahead of that. So you'll be quite strong. You can have a 2.5 times body weight pull and then not have terribly complex training because you're still relatively new to training. And then this is kind of that really sweet spot of intermediate where it's like, hey, you can probably still set a 5 to 10 pound PR on some metric at the end of every week. Strength performance is still rolling along. It's just not every day. But this thing on the side here where we have daily versus weekly versus monthly, we like to say that novices, theoretically, depending on the dosing of stress, they can recover from a full body bout of stimulus literally every day. They are not strong enough to impart a stimulus, which is like really that stressful for them holistically, or across their entire system. And then their recovery ability is so fast because they're so sensitive to it, right? So whereas the intermediate, that can be kind of on like a weekly to monthly-ish basis, where it's like, all right, we're planning to set a PR, 2 times a month, something along those lines. Or an advanced athlete where it's like, okay, when we make attempts at a 1RM, like Chase, for example, it's going to be at a meet and you're going to have known about it 6 months in advance and you're going to have started your prep, well before that period. So that's how we kind of like to break down novice, intermediate, advanced. This talk that we're kind of doing, it's just kind of a general, but it's, I would say, mostly relevant to starting to make your decisions about intermediate programming. Theodore, probably no form checks today. We'll have to see about how time goes, honestly. And then the home says, does your time or strength level determine if you were novice or intermediate? Strength level really does not determine it. You'll meet some studs who on their first day of deadlifting can pull 275. If you go by like most standards, that would be, an intermediate athlete, but they're still by all means a ranked novice. Body size plays into this tremendously as well. So if you start out as like a 90-pound female, even if you end up pulling 115, you're incredibly strong as a 95-pound female, but, like that would still be advanced, so it really, really depends. There's too much nuance there to really give a firm answer. So we'll go over some of the things that we can start to modify. Chase, do you want to kick us off with any of these guys? Choose your favorite.
I like to stick with intensity, right? And this is what we first kind of see as, people are coming into the gym first. It's always adding 5 pounds, right? We're not increasing the volume. We're not going up in reps. We're not going up in sets. It's just the intensity, right? And I can kind of control that a little bit better. I feel like, right? Because let's say, again, if a person who can't squat with a bar yet, I can tweak the intensity, right, with how high they're squatting. And more so, I'm not going to add that person with a bunch of volume at the start because, again, their ability to recover from that is so low that if I overdo it with a bunch of volume, they're not going to want to come in the next day. So intensity kind of works well for not only the extremely detrained, but even for the young kid coming in where I'm just like, hey, man, let's slap on 15 pounds next workout.
So there's a few ways of thinking about intensity. I'm interested to hear your take on this, Chase. So we have intensity as like load on the bar or percentage of 1RM. Let's kind of equate those together. Then there's kind of some other versions of intensity. You can have, session intensity. So let's say that if you are doing 85% of your 1RM lifts for triples, right? But you're doing that on every single lift, the relative intensity of the third lift is going to be higher than the first lift. So we have intensity as across the session, right? Then we have like ratios of intensity where it's just, like a 90% press may not feel super heavy, but a 90% deadlift, that'll feel really heavy, and then that can even change depending on how strong you are. So it's just like Chase, for example, whenever he was peaking his press, his deadlift may not have been the focus of what he was doing. A 90% deadlift was probably okay. It wasn't easy, but it wasn't, the end of the world.
Yeah.
But a 90% press during that time may have been like hard as hell, And then we have effort level. So it's just like, is that person, or like, what is that person's mental effort in the session? So it's like, do you need to slap yourself on the face, twist your ears, and rub chalk in your eyes to get under the bar to do something, even if the bar speed is fast? So there's a lot of different ways of talking about intensity. How often are you considering all these things whenever you're thinking about programming? And a lot of this is coaching. We don't realize we're doing it, I don't think.
Yeah. I think more so it's more so the battle between volume and intensity. I'm like the effort really, it's if the person's there, they give me enough effort, right? I mean, I'm not working with that type of person to where it's like, hey, I need to slap you across the face because you're about to do a world record squat, right? I'm working with people who, they're kind of having doubts. They're almost fretting over the workout the day before, the night before.
Yeah.
So them just showing up, right? That's enough effort for me. I have to now do kind of like the more secrety in that where they don't understand, in the sense that I got to manipulate the volume just a little bit to where they're not going to be too sore, but yet get enough work done in that session, as well as hit the intensity, right? I want the weight on the bar to go up. So maybe, I'm not making them do a heavy 3x3, but maybe just a top single that day. Something that's not too intensive, but at the same time is enough intensity to drive the adaptation.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. So like staying within that relevant ratio of loading, I'll go over volume then. Volume, that's a pretty straightforward one. It's how much work you're doing. And then the ways that we can think about this are across the session or across the week and across the month. The longer you've been in the game before, the longer or more advanced you are, according to our last chart, the more you have to think about this. So like, let's say, for example, a rank novice, you may not have to really think about your, let's say, weekly volume target until maybe, 4 months in, I don't think, 3 months in. But if you are, let's say, I don't know, I think, Chase, you may be thinking about monthly volume targets now for a while, but like, let's say if you're 4 months out from a competition, your monthly volume targets, hugely important,
Yep.
And then within the session, a session volume target can really impact everything else, including frequency, which we'll go over next. So it's like session volume greatly dictates intensity. So like, let's say if you're doing sets of 5 at 315 on the squat, 3 sets of 5 is worlds different than 5 sets of 5, worlds different than 8 sets of 5. If you're doing 8 sets of 5 at 315, the first 4 sets of that, you're doing those as like almost conjugate style bar speed practice. If you can do 8 sets with it, and then by the last 4 sets, that's when it can start getting grindy and slow. So volume is kind of a thing that we do to manipulate. So it's just like that person is still operating in a productive range for bar speed. They're still getting enough weight on the bar to drive strength adaptations. They're still getting enough work to drive in all the rest of the good stuff that we like to. And then frequency is kind of a distribution of the above, so theoretically you could put everyone's work on one session one time a week. It won't work because eventually you'll be so tired that you won't be able to do the rest of the work. If you, let's say I need 12 sets of squats a week to progress, that's kind of a sweet spot for me. If I do 12 sets in one day, I will not be able to do anything else. I won't be able to do some shoulder work. I'll be too tired from carrying the bar. So with frequency, these are the things we have to be concerned about with the distribution of the above. And then Chase, do you want to touch on exercise selection?
Yeah, this kind of goes into how you're progressing into the program, right? So at the start, we just need exercises that get you generally stronger. Now, as you tailor towards whatever your goals are, programming wise, that's where exercise selection kind of comes into play to help progress the lifts that get you the strongest, right? So in the sense of Olympic weightlifting, you need to practice front squats. You need to train overhead squats because those are more suitable to the rack positions of both the snatch and the cleans, and you have to train those. So in order for you to come up out of the bottom of a snatch or a heavy clean and jerk, this is kind of the practice realm, right? And then there's some other stuff that you can throw in too. Whereas if we need to make the press go up, we can't just press every single time. We need different kind of stressors in the sense that exercise selection with pin press, heavy pin bench. Those are great exercises to where you're working on lockout strength, manipulating kind of the range of motion with a deadlift in the sense of like a rack pull or halting to train them. And at the same time, it kind of ties back into that intensity of you are breaking up the intensity through exercise selection by bisecting the range of motion, either doing an overload or working on a deficit of some sense. And your ability to recover is a lot easier because of that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That was the next thing I wanted to touch on, was how exercise selection interacts with volume and intensity, right? So like, let's say that if someone is only doing low bar back squat and then they want to start doing Olympic weightlifting, we need to teach them how to do the front squat. The front squat, they're not going to be able to use the same load that they can use as their low bar back squat. They never will. Likely, it's not even going to be 50% when they start. It's going to be somewhere in the 35 to 40% area. So it's just like, because the rack position is just so different. So you've already mitigated intensity because now they're taking up a squatting slot. Even if it's an extra slot, that intensity for that squatting slot is going to be really low, right? And then now that gives us an opportunity to kind of put some more volume in, right? And then that volume will help condition them to future volume after that point. So let's say, you're having them squat 9 sets a week right now. You take 3 of those sets, you turn them into front squats. Those 3 sets aren't that intense anymore, so you can turn that into maybe 5 sets or 6 sets, right? The stress is going to remain relatively the same, but you've kind of traded intensity for volume as a function of exercise selection. So you can use that to sneak more work in, right? And then now this person is conditioned from going from 9 sets of squats to now, let's say, 12 sets of squats. You went from 3 sets to 6 sets in the middle of the week or something to that effect. And then that you can use to propagate further growth. So exercise selection greatly impacts all of this. And on the other side, let's say if you take your heavy set of deadlifts at the end of the week and then you turn that into rack pulls, you can maybe slap, if you're a good rack puller, another 100 pounds on there. That may screw up so much for you, you have no idea. You may not be really recovered from that for 4 days, whereas from a normal deadlift, it may only take you 2 days, So exercise selection impacts intensity, which impacts volume in both directions, both heavier, lighter, easier, and harder. And then these are the fun ones that I really like. We have sub-exercise variation, so like tempo work, pause work, grip work, stance work. How often do you run into these guys, Chase?
More so if it's just like a quick fix with a movement error. Okay. Like I have a couple of big guys in my evening class where it's very easy for them to just crash into the bottom and get loose, or just kids in general too. Yeah. I'll have them tempo squat. But more so, I use these types of modifications if there's injuries present, right? Shoulders that are tweaked, I'll have them close grip bench. Or even if they're having some adductor pain of, from them tweaking a squat or something like that, I'll modify their toe angle or just make them strict press, because throwing the hips forward kind of tweaks the adductors a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good one that like only people who press really heavy will know very intuitively. It's like once I had some guys start pressing in like the mid 200s and they're like, man, my thighs get really sore from this. And you're like, what? Yeah. Okay. We thought the thighs would be super conditioned. But yeah, so sub-exercise variation, there's a ton of ways to, go about this. The biggest one I think is going to be tempo and pausing. For most people, that's kind of the intuitive thing, So for like a deadlift, that can be a pause deadlift where you pick it up an inch off the ground, then you pause, or it could be at a mid-shin pause, anything to that effect. It can even be a normal deadlift on the way up and a slow deadlift on the way down. You can get super creative with it. Same thing with the squat and everything else. The things about the grip and the stance, I really like those to kind of build skills and build resiliency. I think a lot of people get overly reliant on like, well, if I have to have this very precise toe angle, this very precise stance width, if I go an inch in any direction, I can squat 50% of what I normally do, right? And then what happens is that they have a bad setup on a single attempt or a heavy triple, or they have a weird day where they're not paying attention to their technique, or even they have an injury like he was talking about, and they now have to change some technique and they have to rebuild for so long. So one thing that I've really liked has been doing, just like we do with a closer grip bench, do a wider grip bench. Even let's say, hey, you're going to do your top triple with your strongest grip. And then when you do your 5x5, I want you to go one finger out where it's slightly weaker, or one finger in where it's slightly weaker. And then with the squat, for example, changing the toe angle, changing that distance, it can help you get more quad work, more hip work, depending on what you want to do.
Yeah, I guess another way of saying this too, it's kind of training either more of like the eccentric portion, right, or like the concentric, especially like with an RDL or something. I mean, that's more so exercise selection, but especially with the pause and stuff, you're spending a little bit more time with those isometric holds, and then and really solidifying those in the range of motion. Those will get you really, really sore.
Yeah, that's my favorite. I love the RDL. If I could never do a normal deadlift ever again and just do RDLs, I would.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you have to do one normal deadlift to get the RDL off the floor. Then you can do RDLs after that. That's the only deadlift I want to do. But yeah, so Chase brought up a good point there. Just like we talked about with frequency impact or exercise selection impacting intensity and volume. This kind of exercise variation within each lift also impacts intensity and volume, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like if I need someone to pull back on their intensity, I can just have them do a beltless version of that lift. It'll take 100 pounds off the bar, and then that will help them with whatever recovery reason they need or to get more work in, and still help them feel like they're trying really hard. Or like, let's say that if we need to help them to put more weight on the bar, we'll go to a variation which they're going to be stronger at, So it's all, this is kind of where the jazz is, I feel like, is this kind of sub-exercise variation. I really feel like. Now this one, adaptations versus expectations. This is a really big one that we kind of have to figure out. This is where I think most people run into their problems with intermediate training. The first one being, is anything actually wrong? Chase, does this kind of pop up for you when people are asking questions about programming in the gym?
It's just more so they're not goal oriented, right? So it's like, I've got this nice layer of strength, but what are you going to do with it? And there's like, well, I just want to get strong, but what does that actually entail? And they kind of have this internal conflict of, well, shit, what do I need? Do I need to go do a meet? Do I need to, just make my squat go up another 100 pounds? I don't really know.
And you'll typically see this at the end of novice programming, right?
Yeah. Especially that. This is where you kind of have to, kind of steer them and corral them into picking an option. This is mainly what I see is what's wrong.
Okay. I'll normally see this where people will get like Instagram curious, or let's say I just read a new book on strength training curious, where it's just like, I want to change my programming. I don't know why. I feel like I need to be doing an extra 10 sets of tricep work a week. I don't know why. I feel like I need to go on a cut. All these things that'll show up in the course of the coaching relationship, is people wanting to change. I kind of operate on it's kind of in line with, if it's not broke, don't fix it. If you don't have a really good reason why, don't do it ever.
Yeah.
If it's kind of a dispassionate answer, it's normally not worth it. So whenever you kind of get into this realm of intermediate programming, people always want to know what they should be doing, especially at the end of the LP or in the middle of the LP, where it's like, should I just add 5 pounds forever? It's like, hey, nothing's wrong right now, so keep doing that.
Yeah.
Like I had one guy, he may be watching this, Dave, if you're watching this, hello. But he's a surgeon. He has put like 80 pounds on his deadlift in the first 3 months of working with him. And then he asked me genuinely, he was like, is this good progress? Like, is this good? And then I stopped for a second and I was like, okay, if you did this for like 3 years, you'd be deadlifting like 1,000 pounds. Okay. If you play the piano for 3 years, you'll have an okay piano recital. Your parents will go, maybe one relative, no one else will go.
Yeah.
It takes a long time for these things to cultivate. And even him, super smart guy, super successful guy, was still like a little bit concerned, like, is something wrong? I don't know if something's wrong. Everything's going peachy, but we all have these doubts to try to figure out is anything actually wrong. If nothing's wrong, keep doing what you're doing. That's the best advice we have. But the one thing I like to think about, interested to hear your take on this, Chase, for intermediate programming, is kind of what your win condition is. So we know a good win condition is when you're in the early novice stages of programming, we want 5 pounds on the bar with the same lifts as the technique stays pretty clean 3 times a week. What does that start to mean for you for intermediate programming?
It kind of just determines on who I'm working with. Like if it's an older woman, it's how are you feeling throughout the week? Are you recovering? Are you able to do your normal daily functions and not just lay on your ass because you're so tired after the workout?
Yeah.
But if it's a kid, it's more of the typical things that you think about in the sense that, are you making progress? Are your lifts looking fine? Is the technique fine? And are you nailing that heavy set of 5 that we're doing, or that single, that triple at the end of the week?
How are you gauging that? So that kind of sounds very like Texan Macedonian right there. When we're saying just about at the end of the week, but like whenever let's say you've been programming for someone for 4 months in the intermediate stage, how do you start kind of teasing out progress? It's
still weight on the bar, man. I got to make the weight on the bar go up any point or any possible way that I can think of.
Mhm.
It kind of just changes again if that person's main goal is not to add weight to the bar. Maybe it's getting better at running or something that's not necessarily anaerobic. But if it's within the realms of lifting weights and stuff, again, it's weight on the bar, and I see it as a win. Is if again they're taking each session, they're recovering, right? They're not getting beat up from, let's say, the volume or those heavy rack pulls I'm having them do at that one point of the week. They're able to recover from it. I'm not putting too much stress to where they're not able to recover from it too. Just kind of, again, gauging all the things that we'll talk about soon. Just all of the variables that we see.
Yeah. That's a good point. So the coaching thing that I think a lot of people don't realize within Chase's answer is that every single time it almost started with, are they feeling okay outside of their workouts? Unless that person has like a really good reason to be there, if they feel like trash outside of the gym, they will not be there.
Yep.
Like even I had one guy recently, it was just this week. Hello, Vince, if you're watching this one. But he wanted to add in a yoga class with his girlfriend on the weekend.
God.
But like he was so sore from the heavy, like the leg work that we were doing on like Saturday. He was like, there's no way I can do this class on Sunday. I'll physically fall over, the next day. And it's like the priority is, hey, go have fun with your girlfriend. You're not doing the Tour de France. You don't have a powerlifting meet coming up 2 weeks from now. We can pull back on intensity. That's totally fine. The interactions with the real world and living your life and programming, they need to be considered. That's the coaching answer that a lot of people will skip over. Like when you read practical programming, it's not going to say, if you're going to go to an amusement park on Monday and you don't want to have terrible DOMs the entire day, maybe pull back on squats 2 days before. If you're going to go on a hike with your mom, pull back on squats 2 days before, something like that.
Oh, I love that whenever someone who's kind of still freshly new, they're like, I'm going to go on vacation. Do I need to make up these sessions? I'm like, you can't, man. Like the purpose of you doing this is to improve the quality of life. But if you're not living your life, what's the purpose of, kind of getting stronger and stuff? Like you need to, in some way, display that strength, right? Either a competition, but the vast majority of people, it's just from just living a quality of life that's better than whenever they first walked into the doors, and they get lost in the weeds with that really easily.
Yeah, it'll cycle through the year. I've noticed a lot of people, they really grind their nose into training during winter. They're stuck inside the entire time. And then they're in summer, they're like, hey, I want to go do fun stuff. And it's like, yes, please go do fun stuff. Yes. We want you to be happy. So that's the first thing with the coaching answer that's super important to address. The next part about addressing kind of a win condition is like when you're in intermediate programming, when are you really setting your expectations is when things get better, because it's like if you could theoretically add 5 pounds to everything every time you do it, all of us would be squatting 1,000 pounds. That's not true, so it's just like when exactly do these things happen? And that's kind of, it gets to point number 2, is about creating expectations. So we'll segue into that one. The first thing that we need to figure out is kind of how we quantify our adaptations. So like when you're working with a lifter or when you are that lifter, how are you figuring out if things are going well? The thing that I really like to look at before even load is velocity, is how fast that person is moving what weight. Because if it is just load, it kind of really depends on the person, So it's like I have some guys or some gals, for example, 225 will be the heaviest weight that they'll ever squat if they really committed to it. Load isn't super important there. I have 500-pound squatters. Load not really super important there either, because it's so individual, right? That individual spectrum is really big. So if we just say only load on the bar matters, only pounds per month or pounds per year matter, it's kind of tricky. But it's about how fast they're moving a load that that they can move or that they can't move. So like if the first time someone hits 315 on the squat, it's grindy as hell, and then at the end of that month they're hitting 315 and it looks really fast, that's a huge win. I know that it's, even if we never touched 320 or 325, I know they got stronger because they moved that weight faster. And then the obvious one, and this is the best part about the LP, is it's the load on the bar. If you take someone's deadlift from 135 to 405, they got stronger no matter what. In intermediate training, this gets a little bit trickier. And then reps, so like depending on if this person is like a strict strength athlete versus, depending on what sport they're doing, it could be, hey, how many times can you squat 315 or how many times can you bench 275 as opposed to only chasing a single or only chasing a triple, because those fatigue costs are different. Some people will respond really well to higher rep work. Some people will respond really well to lower rep work. That's your job to tease that out. This is probably more easy for you, Chase, because you do more in-person coaching than I do. But what are you seeing, like when someone's moving quickly or moving slowly for you, versus like what load on the bar they have? Like how often are you making loading calls based off of like movement speed and things like that?
Fairly often, right? And again, this is the majority of the time. I get kids coming in that they've ate like a grilled cheese sandwich, and this is all. So like their ATP, just their fuel that they're running on, drastically cut. So we kind of just have to chunk velocity out of the window here, and just are you just able just to get at least, let's say the set of 5 that we're going for, like a 3x5. Let's cut it down with the reps and kind of work on that, just making sure that you're able just to get all 3 reps, not necessarily with a fast velocity, but still kind of getting in the realms of hitting that intensity / volume, that stressor.
Yeah, getting productive training in. Yeah, because like whenever Chase makes that call, he knows they could probably do those last 2 reps, but they would be ugly and really shitty.
Yep.
So there's no reason to do it. That's kind of that sweet spot, that ends up being with velocity that you'll learn from athlete to athlete. So it's like that kid will probably he'll never move dramatically faster than he's going to move on a good day. He'll also never move dramatically more slowly unless it's a really shitty day, like he was saying. Like he's like, yeah, I just had breakfast and it's now 7:00 at night and I'm training. What do I do?
Yeah.
That happens way too much. And then people are like, I don't know why I missed my workout. I only had, 1 meal over the past 36 hours. And you're like, okay, well, but yeah, so
awesome,
it's crazy. It's crazy. But yeah, so the things that we need to look at was like how much load are you moving, how many times you're moving it, how fast you're moving it. This is how we can quantify our adaptations. And then based off of that, we can create expectations, right? So if someone during their novice stage, they went from 105 deadlift or 135 deadlift to 415 and, let's say 4 months, that's a great LP, right? We now kind of have this expectation. We have training data. We have a good eye for their velocity and then what loading they can do. Then we need to follow that athlete response. So the big thing with this is seeing all of your lifts and then either tracking how things felt or how fast things were, or having an eye for it yourself. So like, let's say, for example, you start on the Texas method, you hit 315 for 3 sets of 5 on your volume day, and then your intensity day is like 375 for a top triple or something like that. And let's say that 375 moves tremendously slowly, right? And you're like, okay, 375 was probably a little bit too high of a ratio for me to shoot for that triple. I need to follow my response as an athlete, and I need to change my volume day and my next intensity based off of that response. So everything that we're doing, it's kind of difficult to explain conceptually what programming is, because it's like we're making decisions about every other decision that's been made. And then based off of that, we're making more and more decisions because there's so many variables to play with. What's kind of the Chase? What are some of the first things that you look for in intermediate training with someone about like how to project out responses? So if you can kind of tell someone's more volume sensitive, more intensity sensitive, things like that.
It's just for me. I just like to throw things out there.
See what sticks.
Basically, yeah. I know. I mean, there is some guidelines, right? So like the older the trainee is, of course, the volume that they're going to deal with can't be too much. They're going to be more intensity sensitive, or rather volume sensitive, but progress with intensity. Whereas with the kid and stuff, it really doesn't matter, right? You can just throw a shit ton of stuff to them. But what I've done is, I've overloaded the deadlift with volume to see how well that progression goes, and maybe cutting back a little bit on the squat, and it actually will benefit the squat just a little bit. It's just kind of weird avenues that you can take, and it's again with programming, it's all just kind of like a weird chemistry experiment, right? You're titrating this, you're manipulating this variable. It's a bunch of black magic on the surface, but
it's a lot of
down. Yeah, but deep down, it's like what you were saying. It's just we are just so meticulous, so anal about tweaking things, making sure everything's right, and it's just years of experience. It just tells us things that the average person will not see.
Yeah. T, we got 2 questions in the chat. Pinecone, ask questions, man. For anybody who's watching, put some questions in the chat. We'll get to it. Theodore said, is it normal to start micro-loading the bench 1 kg per workout after just 2.5 months? He weighs 87 kilos, is benching 85 kilos. Theodore, I think we saw your bench. Your bench technically is fine. You don't have much muscle mass. You're likely at intermediate programming with your benching. You need to do more work. That's it. No two ways about it, my man. Benching may be an intermediate before anything else does. It happens person to person, so consider that. But yeah, so the kind of the decisions upon decisions thing, the black magic, voodoo, jazz, whatever you want to call it. Essentially all we're doing is we're getting a ton of data points from our athletes. We're looking at how they're moving in so many different ways, right? This could be like knee slide during the squat. This could be how much hip drive is coming out of this bottom. This could be how their back flexion is doing out of the bottom of that same exact squat. When you're watching it, every joint angle, every diagnostic thing that we can think of is impacting how we're interpreting how that person is moving, how fast that person is moving, and then what decision we make after that, right? Because like you may have moved that 315 really fast on Monday, but if technically that was a big issue for you, we may not want to push that hard on Friday's heavier day, Possibly we could, possibly we couldn't. It kind of really depends. And then the same is, if Chase has someone come in and they're like, yeah, I had a really terrible day at work, or I'm on my phone constantly because, I'm sending a bunch of work emails in the middle of my session. Those are also things that we have to adjust for within the session itself. Like there's so much not only to the pre-planning of programming, but also that client coach interaction. Like once the second you see your athlete walk in the door, you'll be able to make determinations on how they're walking in and seeing you about what you should be doing with them. I think, Chase, do you see that a lot with your older people or with your younger people with that kind of day-to-day variation? What's more popular?
More so with the older people. I mean, so let's think about it in this aspect. It's summer. What are they doing right now? Like maybe they're practicing some sort of sport, but in reality, they're sleeping a shit ton, they're eating a shit ton, and they're video gaming, right? They're not doing anything. Like their ability to recover is so perfect that whereas their counterparts, whenever they come in, it's no, man, fuck, man. Like my girlfriend's bitching at me because we had a fight last night, or my dog's kind of sick. Like they have a lot more external stress than the 13-year-old kid that I have.
Yeah, it's kind of there's like a little peak to it, like a little bimodal peak, I would say. No stress before college. College can be really stressful for a lot of people. Once they start their career, that middle portion is not super stressful, and then once you're old again, it starts picking back up. Tidor, I thought that was you. That could have been someone else. That could have been one of the other guys who sends in stuff frequently. I'm forgetting his name, but we'll see. Naham E says, if a 21, 22-year-old college football player is a practice player, is he capable of running the NLP in season? Chase, what do you think?
Definitely. What you kind of have to worry about is, are you able to recover from the practice sessions and the workouts, right? And being a college athlete, oh yeah, like you have, again, every access to eating right from the dining hall, because I mean, depending on whatever college you're at, like their dining hall is going to be more suited for the players and stuff. And then, like you're just now probably starting out school during that time, so it's not too strenuous, but they can both run practice and an obvious linear progression reasonably.
Yeah. Talk to the people who, if you have to do like strength sessions with your staff team, you should ask them and be like, hey, this is the thing I want to do. I can manage my own shit. I'm practice only anyways. It's fine. They'll probably won't really care, but definitely talk to them. SK has a good question. He says currently in 3 sets of 5 LP, he missed the 5th rep of his first set of squats in his last training session, and he finished with sets of 3 and a double. Should I move to triples from here on out, or add a light day, or add 5 pounds every other session? That's a really good question. We'll help you out with that question in the next slide once we kind of figure out how to identify problems. And then Mr. Dr. Sir, that's a nice name. I had trouble bridging the gap between intermediate and advanced sections of practical programming. All the adjustments until advanced seem like minimum dose changes, then we jump to an 8-week thing. I would say that's a reasonable comment about practical programming. It kind of relies on your ability to... That's kind of the suspension of disbelief in that minimum dose or minimum effective dose changes can last that long, if that makes sense. It's kind of like with the novice it's the same exact thing kind of conceptually as the novice to intermediate. It's like you can look at an intermediate template and then look at the novice template. They look wildly different, but you kind of have to piece together the stages of how to get there. And then you also have to understand that even though you're supposed to be making minimum effective dose changes, you don't always have to, right? So it's like after Chase is finished with his meet, I guarantee you, he's going to make probably a significant amount of changes because he just had an event come up. So it's like he's not going to do the last week of his taper again and then add one set. That wouldn't make any sense, or he's not even going to do the last second to last week before his taper and add one set and then maybe another 2 reps there. He's going to go, all right, this is what I need to do to get back to form, and it's going to be a larger change than that. With an advanced athlete, you're almost always going to have competition events or phases to gear around, right? So it's just like let's say if they're doing their competition, they're doing their big run, they're doing their big fight. After that, that's kind of when you start to periodize the year. So I know he has competitions in June, in September, in January. These are the phases that I can use to figure out how to make these big programming jumps. It's okay to not do minimum dose changes. It happens with everybody.
But I mean, even though it may seem like you're not doing a minimum dose, you kind of are, in the sense that like you're not really changing your exercise selection. You're not really changing too much of like the intensity or the volume during the weeks, right? It's just changing a small variable, but it looks bigger on the grand scheme of things, right? So like, let's say if I originally did a 4-week prep going into a meet, and I felt like I didn't really have enough time to, peak, or just kind of my recovery was kind of shit during it, maybe the next cycle I go is 6 weeks. So that's really not that big of an adjustment, but it seems like it on paper because now you have to write out another 2 weeks of training.
Yeah. It's like it's
kind of like the ripples.
You're jumping around in time.
Yeah, exactly. It's just as you again get through that stage, the stages of like the intermediate, advanced, you're working against time, right? And we have to schedule and we have to tweak things in accordance to time. And again, in that stage, time takes a while, so it seems like a bigger change than what you're actually doing.
Yeah, like just to give you an example, Dr. Sir. So it's like actually on the 4 days from now, on the 17th, I have a few BJJ guys competing in a competition in the northeastern United States. I have all of their training data for their past like 4-ish months of prep for this competition. Each one of them, I'm going to have learned different lessons based off of their performance, how they felt, all of these things that we can go into this next cycle with, because it's probably going to be a pretty similar amount of time before they do the next thing, right? So like one of them, his front squats have been getting persistently faster the entire block, no matter what we've been doing stress-wise with his low bar squat or his practice schedule. So I know that it's like, okay, reliably, front squats are a good idea for his next prep, And I know for him that like deadlifts in the last month and a half of the prep, as he's been losing weight, have been super stressful. And I've been able to see that in the bar speed on his Pendlay row, on his deadlifts, on his low bar back squat, because they really kind of pull together pretty similarly. I know that in that last 2 months of that prep, I need to get ahead of it and pull back on that intensity so that we don't run into the same problems. So whenever I'm making this next block that could be 8 weeks for him, I know ahead of time what decisions I can be making. It's a lot of bias confirmation, but you can learn to tease out what's relevant and what's not. All right. So Chase, we kind of do, I don't want to say lightning round on these ones, but these are different scenarios as to things that are wrong. I guess want to go through top to bottom. What do you think we should do? Yep. Someone is moving slower and slower every session, but the weight is increasing, let's say 2.5 to 5 pounds a workout. What do you do?
Kind of ask the 3 main questions, right? Are you eating enough? Are you sleeping enough? And then what is your jumps like, right? Are you taking too big of a jump? And then what is your rest time in between sets, right? If you're still like 2 minutes in between sets and you are like in the 3rd month of your novice linear progression, you probably need to rest a little bit longer.
That's a big one.
The weights are taxing now. You need to give yourself a time to kind of have that slight of recovery, to where you can push with an accurate velocity throughout the whole entire 3 sets that you're doing.
All right. So let's say that someone is they're moving slower and slower. Let's say they're trying to break past 365 in their deadlift. Anytime they try to get to 355, it's not working. It's like the same exact speed across, or excuse me, it's the same weights, but they're kind of moving slower and slower. It's almost like there's some, a little bit of backslide. How do you feel about that?
I think that they're having a little bit too much stress throughout the week.
You pull back on work.
Maybe, but again, this
Okay.
kind of ties back into those 3 questions again.
Let's assume that they're doing the first 3 questions right.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd probably depending on what lift it is, right? If it's the press or the bench, we need to add more stress to it. But if it's the deadlift or the squat, I'm gonna kind of tweak out the stress to where they're not getting a heavy dose of it day after day. We're kind of stringing it along, maybe doing getting you a light day in between if you're squatting heavy. Maybe changing your deadlifts up to where you're power cleaning in the middle of the week, enough to where you have, again, a longer period to recover from that first initial bout of that stress.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, like as the weights get really big, the recovery deficit that we're building increases, even if it's the same frequency, the same sets, the same volume. It may just need a little more time. All the tiny chemical things that are happening to repair stuff just take a finite amount of time. The larger the insult, the larger it takes to dig out of it. Conditioning helps, but it takes even longer to build up. So like if someone's moving more slowly, but that increasing weight is still going on, those will kind of inflect at some point and they won't be able to move the weight at all. Right. So it's like if they're moving slower and slower and slower as we increase the weight and weight and weight, eventually it won't work. Right. So that's kind of a clue that we need to get ahead of it and change something. And then the changing something, that's what Chase was saying, like introduce the light day to the squat, introduce the power clean, things like that. So let's go to this third case. Someone is feeling really recovered. They feel fine, but they're not improving. They're not getting any stronger. That's a big indicator that they need to do more work, right? Yep. So there's some amount of feeling like crap that's okay, and it kind of depends on person to person. So like Aunt Meredith, she doesn't want to feel like crap to the point where she's going to hurt her back if she's mowing the lawn or she's taking her groceries up the stairs. But like if you have a 20-year-old kid or a 45-year-old guy who's not a super stressful job, if they're feeling 100% the day after a workout, that's not good. That's a clue that we can be pushing harder. We're leaving gains on the table. Especially if they're not seeing improvement, so even if you think they're at a high amount of volume, but they're like, I'm not really getting stronger at the rate I want to, that's a good clue they can do more work. What do you think if someone feels really run down, they're not seeing any improvement, they're getting a little bit weaker? What's kind of the first thing that you examine?
Again, what is their kind of their cycle of stress? Meaning, are they hitting a bunch of stressful events day after day, workout to workout? So we need to, again, getting a program change to where they're able to improve on that ability to recover from that stress. Or in general, like, are they doing something extra, right? Are they, after you're getting done with training with them, the next day they're doing HIIT routine, they're doing a CrossFit class because their buddies are doing it. Or like you have the lady who wants to lose belly fat. She's over there doing a bunch of like, cycling classes, rowing. You got that, like the Pilates shit, all that stuff. So I would look at, external stresses, because you are controlling all this as a coach or just the person that or you're doing this. You're controlling all the internal stress that's inside the gym, right? So you make sure that you're doing everything right with the program and all that stuff. But I look at external stress.
Okay, yeah, that's a good one. Like you have to do a little bit of detective work as a coach to figure out what's going on in the outside. So like if someone's feeling fatigued, that's a good clue that they're doing a decent amount of work, right? If they're not seeing any improvement from that work, because you will get stronger from training, more or less, always. If they're not seeing any improvement from there, it's normally things on the outside that we kind of have to figure out. And then technical problems. This could be in their setup. It could be like a mental thing. It could be, when I'm saying setup, I mean like the 6 hours before their workout, So if they have scheduled their workout on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, on Tuesday and Thursday, they have a big call with their boss. And on Saturday, their workout's great every time. Let's see if we can move those workouts to a different day of the week that's not as stressful for them. That's kind of where the interviewing skills of coaching come in. You need to figure out what days are good people, what days aren't. We have some more questions in the chat. Pinecone King, having trouble with recovery, specifically sleep. Any programming changes to keep my LP going? I realize I should sleep more. He weighs 220 at 5'9", squats 325, benches 250, deadlifts 360, press 160. You're taking 7 to 12 minute rests. He's already added a light squat day. What do you think, Chase?
That sounds like kind of like that third or almost fourth bracket, right? You're not giving yourself enough time to recover, right? You're probably sleeping well, right? You're hitting deep into those REM sleeps, but again, you can't recover because of how stressful those events that you're doing. I think easily by these numbers again. I don't know how long you've been doing the program, but I think around for a squat that's heavy, a deadlift that heavy, yeah, you need to start breaking up those stressful events and kind of getting in lighter days, breaking it apart to where you're getting almost into the intermediate type programming.
Yeah, I agree. Moving to intermediate programming, there's no reason to be married to the LP. It is a tool, right? If you have your favorite screwdriver, but it is not the right head, I'm sorry, you can't. It's not worth it. It's not worth stripping your screw for absolutely no reason. You've got great results from the LP already. You're deadlifting 360. That's more than most people will ever deadlift. You should really move on to intermediate programming, especially if you're doing 7 to 12 minute rests. So let's say if you've moved to triples already and you're taking 7-minute rests, so you're doing 5 times 7, you're doing like 35 minutes of rest for one lift. If you pull the intensity down and get more work in, you'll be able to drive more progress, right? I'm not saying that, it's always volume to progress 1-to-1, but eventually you can't operate at that level of intensity the entire time. Something will break. Mr. Doctor, sir, I have a lot to think about. I get to think about it more. The novice intermediate chapters can really hold your hand and do all the reasoning for you. That's super true, man. That's super true. That's one of the big problems with people coming into the advanced section is the advanced section has a lot of jazz to it. Having my SS coach defiantly definitely helps give me ideas for what to do with my lifters. Guess that's the closest I'll get before coming to Texas of becoming an apprentice at an SS gym. Yeah, reach out to Chase, man, if you're trying to do an apprenticeship.
You need to go ahead and just be an apprentice, man. You'll learn so much so quickly. And it's instantaneous feedback, too. It's just like coaching, man.
Yeah.
I'd rather have someone watch me, tell me what the fuck I'm doing wrong, and fix it right then and there. Same thing with my ability to program and to just, express the model in my head.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll do this next slide, then we'll finish up with the rest of the questions. Any more questions? Toss them in there. Oh, Chase is your coach. Oh, Mr. Doctor.
Oh, shit. Is that it may be David. So
Dr.
David or Greg, I don't know.
All right, so we'll run through this one. All right, we got to figure out how to choose an assistance lift. These are some of the things that we can figure out. So an assistance lift, we have to figure out if we're doing it for problem-solving purposes or for stress application purposes. So if it's for problem-solving, like Chase was saying way back when, 45, 50 minutes ago, if you're having problems sagging at the bottom of your squat, a pause squat can be incredibly helpful for that, right? If you're having a problem where if on like the 5th rep of the set or let's say the 3rd rep, you're like, man, I really feel like being done, sets of 5 are so damn long, go and do a set of 8. A set of 5 will feel pretty short, You can introduce variation for problem solving, or you can introduce it just for stress application. So there are kind of different ways that you can approach these things. Things like with pause work, with tempo work, with range of motion, particularly the rack pull with setting your back, those can all be for problem solving. There are other ones where it's almost always just stress application. Does any of that stand out to you? What do you think is a variation that's more or less just used for stress application?
Really just a rack pull or a halting. More so probably just a halting. I mean, a rack pull, again, you can kind of use it as a teaching lift with just someone who's really not familiar with setting their low back. Yeah. But a halting, it's like, no, you're going to do this because you need to get fucking stronger off the floor.
Yeah, you're going to do a ton of reps off the floor, not to the finish. Yep. So then we have the range of motion. So like a range of motion would be a partial or a lengthened motion. So like a deficit deadlift would be a longer version. A rack pull would be a shorter version. So like an ass to grass front squat would be a lengthened version of the normal squat, as opposed to a box squat or a pin squat for the partial. And then we have like our stance variations, grip variations, and bar. So like you can do a sumo deadlift or a conventional deadlift if you're an insane person or kind of stupid, or you can do a Jefferson deadlift, whatever you want. You could do a wider stance conventional or a narrow stance conventional. Really depends. Then we have kind of bar placement variations, like you can do the high bar squat, the front squat, the low bar squat. And then we have our grips. That could be a close grip or a wide grip for things like pressing and benching, and even the deadlift as well. So like a snatch grip deadlift versus a conventional grip deadlift. Chase, how often are you playing with grips? Do you use the snatch grip deadlift a lot?
I've tried to recently. It's more so just getting comfortable with having that sensation of, dude, this feels like shit in my hands.
Yeah.
It feels like I'm going to not have any chance to accelerate this bar, but if I get comfortable with just deadlifting, and especially at a weight that's heavier than what I can snatch, it kind of it helps a lot more just for like the mental ease and stuff. But whenever I use this with clients, it's more so just trying to affect the stress, right? With I never really go anything wide with my grips, except if it's to fix like shoulders and stuff like that for a squat. But more so close grip, yeah, I'll start adding that in for just some more stress for the triceps.
Yeah, for sure. So back to the snatch grip deadlift, it is a longer movement, right? So I'm making the arms really short. It's kind of the same thing as a deficit. So it's just like, let's say if you're trying to slot in deficit deadlifts for someone and then like, man, my stomach gets really jammed up at the bottom. All right, you can just try a snatch grip deadlift then. You'll still have the higher hip position, but you can still make the range of motion longer, So like, for example, if someone is really sensitive to loading on the bar, it seems like their back gets tweaky. Let's say if they are really high intensity more than 1 or 2 times a week, they need to, let's say, pull 3 or 4 times a week. You can do a deficit deadlift or a tempo deadlift or a 2-count pause deadlift or a snatch grip deadlift, because those will all be a lot lighter than, let's say, a rack pull would be, right? So these assistance lift applications, they all go back to what we're talking about with intensity, volume, and frequency and all that stuff. All right, we just passed the hour mark, boys. I think we'll probably do this one a little bit more eventually, how to choose assistance lists for the exercise or for each movement, because that's a big one. That's really a big one. All right, we got some more questions. How do I add a light squat day? SK, yeah. 90%, he said 3x5 at 90% for a first recommendation. What percent do you roughly offset, Chase, with your light squat?
I just take it down to about 80, maybe 75. I mean, the point of a light day, and again, people kind of get lost in this, it has to be light, right? So whether it's 20 pounds, 50 pounds, something that is allowing you to recover, right? Maybe even work on form just a little bit. Don't worry necessarily about a percentage, just drop the weight down enough to where you feel like you can easily ace the set even on your deathbed.
Yeah. Yeah, because like that person is still going to be in a little bit of a recovery hole or deficit coming into Wednesday. If you tried to even put the same weight that you had on the bar on Monday, they would not be able to do it, right? It's too heavy. It's too big of an event to recover in 2 days. So you need to make sure it's super light. And a lot of times that's just for technique too.
Yep.
Yeah, Frack Ice said, how do you program for advanced bench press? His bench press isn't advanced, but the rest of it's on the LP. Yeah, man. So if your bench press is really advanced and it needs more attention, bench twice a week, press on the middle of your week, and then consider adding a 4th slot for either pressing, if your press helps move your bench, or for a bench accessory. So like if you're going bench press, overhead press, bench press, you can slide in another overhead press on that 3rd day, or you can move it to a 4th day where that could be overhead press or some close grip or anything like that. So he's saying, is Texas method for bench the right decision? It depends. If you're someone who responds to those volume targets, it definitely is. It's great. If you find that you're not responding for any of the above reasons we talked about for the last hour, that's how you got to figure it out. You got to go back to this slide and then figure out what's happening. Is the bar speed going down? Where's the weight going? Are you feeling fatigued? Are you feeling recovered? You got to follow your response as an athlete, or got someone to do it for you. Any parting words, Chase, for the programming episode?
Oh, so I actually figured out who Mr. Dr. Stir is. His name is Martin. I want fucking retard now.
Where does Martin live? What is this full
Martin's
name?
in California. I can't give out his full name.
Come on.
I've actually forgot his last name. But it's Martin, and yeah, he actually had a meet, and he did well.
Nice, that's awesome.
I worked with him, yeah, and glad to see the numbers that he hit. Now we gotta do a little bit more work, Martin, but we'll fucking ace it, man.
Okay, cool. Mr. Dr. Sir, show in the chat. California, R.I.P., man.
Yeah.
I like visiting California. Anytime I visited, I've always had a good time. It's only been vacation, though, so, who cares? But yeah, find Chase, follow his Instagram. Thank you all very much for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, all that bullshit. And then same thing here. Chris K, showing up in the comments with a thumbs up. Thumbs up to you, my man. All right, guys. What, do you say something, Chase?
Yeah, I was going to say, let us know what y'all want to kind of let us cover, right?
Yeah.
We want to hear a little bit more about what y'all have to say, right? I mean, I think this is probably the most questions I've ever seen in the chat right now. And programming is always, again, like I said, and even Alex said this too, it's fucking mysterious. So if we
people
can
like to nerd out on it.
Yeah. So if we can help you all in any way possible, just let us know.
Yeah. Let us know what you want to talk about. But all right. See you guys.